Andrew George.
Robertson, and I beg to move Amendment 10 in my name and those of my right honourable and honourable friends. And the purpose of Amendment 10 is to address the oft repeated by the Secretary of State key concern of the government, and that is the circumstance in which, and it's been repeated again today by the honourable member for Gloucester and others, the circumstances in which benefits have risen over selective periods, admittedly, but have risen in certain circumstances at a rate higher than wages, and at a time, and straitened times like those we experience at present. Establishing a principle which says that shall not happen, and that average wages will indeed be the marker against which future benefit rises are set, should be indeed the principle going forward. Although I have to say that having said that, and indeed repeating an earlier intervention on the honourable member for Woking, is that a further weakness of the government's proposal is that of actually enshrining in the future a policy which sticks to a rather blunt instrument and indeed an inflexible instrument of a 1% rise going forward to a period beyond the next general election to 2016, as if we can with confidence foretell of what is likely to happen in those circumstances. On that, I will give.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. Is it not the case that the 1% uprating is for 2 years? It's not designed to be extended beyond after the next election.
The honourable gentleman is right that it is for 2 years. It's from 2014 to 2016, beyond the next general election.
No. Yes.
So I will happily give way. Yes.
Grateful to the honourable friend for giving way. In this bill, this bill only covers 2 years, but the government has already announced its intention in the autumn statement to have a separate statutory instrument coming forward for 1% for next year. So in total, it would cover 3 years.
Yes. Well, the combined effect of both the statutory instrument and the bill is indeed for 3 years. But I wanted to make it clear that in this bill, what we're doing is I have no clairvoyant skills whatsoever, and my ability to forecast is I would never follow my forecast if one is forecasting the future of the economy or prices. But certainly we are being asked in these circumstances to forecast what is likely to happen, particularly in relation to prices, particularly food price volatility, in the context of food price volatility, which we know takes place in the circumstance of tremendous uncertainty in the energy market and indeed in other markets. We're being asked to predict what the circumstances are likely to be in 2016, beyond the next general election. Part of the background to this, I would in fact reflect on some comments made in the opening remarks of the honourable member for Gateshead earlier, where he was talking about there were parts of the country where there are large swathes of people out of work, and then there are other parts of the country where there are large swathes of people who are in work. There are also many places in the country, and that includes my own, where there are a lot of people who spend their lives going in and out of work because of the seasonality of the nature of the economy of an area like my own, that is of West Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. And in those circumstances, not only are people moving in and out of work, not of their own choice, but because of the circumstances in which they live, but also there is a plethora of 0 hours contracts. There's a plethora of people who in fact exist on the basis of putting together part-time work. Although the government, I must congratulate the government on their achievements with regard to the rolling out of apprenticeships, the fact is that we're talking about apprentices who are also having at the weekend to do bar work, waitressing and other work in order to be able to get themselves up to a living wage where they're being paid £2.65 an hour for that apprenticeship. I mean, there's a good opportunity there, but we have to acknowledge there is effectively amongst working people who are moving in and out of wages, a class, if you like, a group of people who are on the very margins of survival. And these people are going to be significantly affected by these proposals to peg benefits at 1%. And those who argue that this is about ensuring that we make work pay, and that clause 1 is entirely about benefits, out of work benefits. I mean, the fact is that there are significant numbers, many thousands, who are going to be affected by this, who are clearly in work or indeed in and out of work, and that's the most difficult position to be in of all. I will give way on that.
And he makes a valid point about those who move from unemployment into temporary work and the complexities of the current system of reapplying for all these benefits. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the introduction of universal credit is going to absolutely improve that situation and remove that uncertainty and make it a much bigger incentive for those out of work to take temporary work?
I entirely agree with that point, and I congratulate particularly my honourable friend, the honourable member for Thornbury and Yate, for really being an advocate for this for many, many years, and I know that he must be particularly pleased, and indeed I'm pleased for him, and I think it's an entirely appropriate that this policy is being rolled out, and I agree that we hope will in fact help to iron out the difficulties which I think a lot of people face. Having said that, let's see it as it is rolled out, and let's hope that it does indeed address those particular issues. But if we go back to the principles which were set out by the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the first emergency budget, where we were clearly told that we're all in it together, those with the broadest shoulders shall bear the greatest burden, the vulnerable shall be protected. Those are clearly principles against which we must measure, and we'll all have different views as to where the lines might be drawn as far as achieving those particular objectives are concerned, and that's when we get into specifics like those are the bills which we have before us today. We say really at what is still the outset, 7 minutes in, that my honourable friend, the member for Thornbury and Yate, is someone I have the highest respect for, and it would be a kamikaze mission in the extreme for me to begin a debate by asking, well, what on earth does he know about benefits? My honourable friend is highly regarded in this sphere, is respected by people, indeed by his political opponents, and absolutely rightly so. And what he's achieved in his position is very considerable indeed, and indeed in this area, what we would have had he not been in this position, I think is a great deal worse. But I'll give way on that point.
The honourable gentleman began on his paean of praise to his right honourable friend. I thought he was making a very good case about the situation in West Cornwall and about the difficulty of people on the margins of the labour market. That being the case, when it comes to the votes, will he and his honourable friends who've signed this amendment also be voting against clause stand apart?
Well, I'm sure that my right honourable and honourable friends will make their own minds on this issue, and I don't speak for them on it. But where we are at the moment, I've made it quite clear as far as the bill as a whole is concerned that I'd be voting against the bill as it presently stands, because I don't think it addresses the fundamental concerns which I have indeed enunciated elsewhere. But I do just need to come back to the point of congratulating my honourable friend in the achievements that he has made, because my beloved coalition colleagues may not like what I'm about to say, but I mean we do have to we do have to acknowledge that what would have happened from what we understand has been articulated from the Conservative Party in recent months, had my honourable friend, indeed the Liberal Democrats, not been in the coalition government. I mean, first of all, I think one would have to question whether we would have the increase in the personal tax allowance, which I congratulate the coalition government on achieving. The Conservatives made it quite clear that not only would they, in fact, wish on some occasions to freeze benefits altogether, but in fact freeze those benefits for a 6-year period. So we wouldn't even be getting a 1% rise, we'd be getting a freeze in benefits, a 0 increase. And the wider impact on pensioners and disabled would be significant. and indeed child benefit would be constrained and indeed cut from those families with more than 2 children. I give way to the Honourable.
I think he's making a very powerful contribution. I'm just wondering, from what he said, that therefore, does he reject the spin that's been put on what underlies this this whole question from members of the government benches, that the fact that people on benefits have had their income uprated by 20% as opposed to those in work who've only had their income uprated by 12.5% over the 5-year period. But when you look at it in cash terms, the way it actually impacts on people in their pockets, that it's actually £49 on average for those in work and only £12 or so for those who are reliant on benefits.
All I would say to the Honourable Gentleman is there has been a lot of selective quotation of statistics and a lot of very selective beginning and ending of time periods within which those comparators are made, and it's purely on that basis that if the principle, which I understood that the principle is as it was articulated by the Secretary of State in his opening remarks, explaining the basis on which and the reasoning behind the introduction of this bill, is that if the purpose was to ensure that we will never have a situation where benefits were to rise faster or higher than average wage increases, then we've introduced an amendment to deal with that.
I'm very grateful to my old friend. He suggested that the time frames that people are referring to are somewhat arbitrary, but clearly they're not. I mean, looking at the last 5 years, we can determine when the financial crisis began. And that's an entirely natural time frame to be looking at.
Well, there are a variety of ways in which one can look at it, and indeed, if you look at it over a much wider time period, say the last 20 or 30 years, I mean, you certainly wouldn't come to the same conclusion that benefits have risen at a rate significantly higher than wages, because that is clearly not the case. I'll give way one final time, then I'm going to make...
Will you acknowledge that the fiscal problem that we face, the government faces, began as a result of the financial crisis? So it is entirely logical to look at this particular issue with respect to the time period between the financial crisis, when that began in 2008, and the current day.
Well, when does the crisis end? I mean, looking at the OBR's figures as far as looking at the OBR's figures going forward, I mean, there have been indeed. I mean, it's predicted that as far as the estimates of the cost of our particular amendment, that in 3 years' time, that wages will be exceeding CPI. I mean, one has to look over I think a much wider period. And if we're dealing with the principle, which I thought is what we were dealing with, and if the principle which could be put on a poster, and after all, I mean, the Conservatives did pay for some posters just a couple of weeks ago to make the particular point, it was unacceptable for benefits to be rising higher than wages, and that was the primary point that the Conservatives were seeking to emphasise in their poster campaign. Then this amendment deals with that particular issue. Now, I said earlier that one of the big weaknesses of the government's proposal, and the reason why I'm opposing this, is because of the inflexible way in which the 1% takes no account of what may indeed happen to, say, for example, food price inflation in 2015-16. And it's all very well having a bill which in effect takes a clairvoyant view that we can confidently predict that a 1% increase is not going to press large numbers of both working as well as out of work families across this country in severe and extreme hardship. But the fact is that we know, as we've experienced this year just in the UK alone, the impact of very significant volatility in our climate. There's been very significant climate change, and that climate change is having a very significant impact across the food baskets of the world, and indeed many developing countries, and indeed our own. And in those circumstances, we need to ask ourselves whether we can confidently say that this isn't going to have the potential food, if you like, price spikes that we saw only a few years ago. And I would suggest to the House we may indeed see again. there is a tremendous and I think very significant concern about the potential volatility in the energy market and what's happening to prices there. And it's on that basis that, in my view, I think going forward on the basis of an inflexible, rather arbitrary figure of 1%, and saying that in 2016 that we can confidently say that we won't need to bring some primary legislation back to this House to revise that figure, I think is foolhardy indeed. Now, so we've made the point about the inflexibility. We've made the point about the risk of further benefits rising faster than wages. But there's also the impact on housing as well, because the government in their emergency budget brought forward proposals to cut housing allowance, housing benefit from the 50th centile to the 30th. And it was absolutely right. I think that whether you like the fact that it's that only 30% of the market might be available for those people in receipt of housing benefit, rather than potentially half of the housing rental market, the private rental market, might be available. The fact that it is associated with the if you like variation in private sector rents, I think is absolutely essential. What this measure does, just taking housing benefit on its own, is actually breaks the link between what is available in the market and then actually it introduces another measure which actually pegs the housing benefit back again. And it's in those circumstances, if we're to take that forward, and especially given the fact that it's certainly in my area, and I know that many others, the government's attempt to actually peg housing benefit down by introducing the 30th centile rather than the 50th has actually failed to constrain private sector rents across many parts of the country. It hasn't actually had the desired impact. Maybe it has in some areas, it's certainly not in mine, and I know that it hasn't in many others as well. And really it's on that basis that I feel that the measures brought forward by the government in this bill, I think, have been ill thought through. I fear that what will happen ultimately is that whether it be next year or the year after, we will have to come back and we'll have to look at these figures again. And it's on that basis I do hope that when we get to the opportunity to divide the House on this issue, that we will be looking and listening to what the Minister says in response.
Hear, 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 hear.